Well, last several weeks I've really enjoyed hanging out in the 13th century with you. But maybe tonight we'll return to the 21st for a bit. As much as I enjoy the old teachings, and I don't think they're avoidance either. They're relevant and pertinent today and important. But we also can't hide from what's in front of us either. So, how's everybody doing? With it all okay? I've mostly been avoiding the news. Just seemed like too much, Dipping in a little bit, being upset, pulling back out again. It's pretty overwhelming, but mostly avoiding. Until then, the news came directly to my family. And then I had to pay attention again. So many of you know, and I think a few of you gotten to meet my Kenyan daughter, Marcy Okumu. I last saw Marcy in May with her new baby. He was 5 months old then. Now he's just turned a year. And she was able to come to Raisel and my wedding too, which was really wonderful. And I've been connected to Marcy since she was 13. I started out as her sponsor with my first wife. Little by little, I became somehow her father. She and her 5 siblings were orphaned by the AIDS pandemic, living in western Kenya, the lands of the Luo people near Lake Victoria, which is one big lake. It's like a sea. And a friend of mine started a charity to do AIDS relief in Africa, and ended up figuring out that a really effective thing he could do, beyond sending medicine and so on, was to sponsor orphan girls to help them get to school. So we helped Marcy go to boarding school. The school was just outside the next village, about 15 miles away, but I think it must have been a little bit like another planet the first time she went there. And it really helped her. It really went well. It worked as hoped, that when you educate girls, you lift up families and societies, and you sure protect the girls. And the Sangha's been involved in this as well. Sangha members over the years have helped support Marcy and her siblings, and sometimes stepping forward for projects. After my first trip to Africa, I had a really moving experience while visiting the farm, the family farm back at the village. Marcy's older brother, Maxwell, is the farmer. He stayed home, didn't get much education. Smart guy, not educated. And Maxwell was walking me around the farm, maybe 2 or 3 acres, but kind of broken up into a number of different plots, kind of interwoven with neighbors, and I'm sure very old rules about who does what where. We're kind of proud when we're around a place for 100 years, right? This is since the beginning of humanity. They've been there, more or less. But he's showing me the farm, tomatoes, corn, rice. The rice was down below in the bottom where it was wetter. And one of the first questions he asked me when he met me, after kind of mumbling, "Thank you for helping my sister," he said, what crops do you grow? What do you grow back home? It's an important thing to know about another person. What kind of crops do they grow? And we were walking by his cornfield, but the plants there didn't look so good. They looked a bit withered, a bit dried out. And Maxwell explained to me that usually there's rain in January. I was there at the end of January. The rains in January called the small rains, as opposed to the big rains in April, May, into June. And so they plant their crops expecting that rain, that water to be there when the plants need it. And that year the rains hadn't come, the small rains hadn't come. And I was instantly confused because from where we were standing, I could see maybe 50 yards down this little slope an irrigation canal with water in it. So I asked him, why don't you use that water to water your corn? And he just looked at me a little puzzled and said, how would I bring that water up to here? And I looked around again. No hoses, no spigots, no pumps, no infrastructure, shovels, and digging sticks, and rich soil. And I really thought about that, you know. What seems like a small thing is a big thing, you know. No pump and unreliable weather, climate change, could immediately mean a rural village family would be a bit poorer and a bit hungrier that year. You know, it's amazing and kind of intense to be face to face with subsistence farming in, I think it was 2017. And I just looked it up. About 25% of the world's population today depends on small subsistence farms like that for food and income, you know. It's livelihood. And we all have our stresses about money, I know for sure. But what if your retirement plan was not anything written on a website or a paper statement? What if your retirement plan was that your grown kids would stay around and do a good job with the farm so that your family would keep going? So anyway, I told that story in a talk kind of like this, a Dharma talk, back at Forest Street. After I came back, I was kind of musing about it, and it had not occurred to me to take action, actually. I'm just like, wow, isn't that wild, amazing, what a thing. So I told that little story, and somebody kind of in the back of the room, it was probably Connie Martin, I think, piped up and interrupted me good and loud, let's buy him a pump! So we did. We did. We had a little fundraiser. We sent, I think it was about $600 for a gas-powered pump for Wellington. I made an agreement with him. We had this written agreement. It was like he wrote it on binder paper and mailed it to me. It took a long time to get here. That he would share the pump with his neighbors, which later I found out he followed through. And the pump helped everybody in that side of the village. Village is not like a little cluster, though. It's kind of spread out. Cinder block and mud huts with thatch or rusty metal roofs. But Mercy went to the big city, finished an undergraduate degree and a graduate degree, and now she's a grown woman working in service of her communities in Kenya, other parts of rural Kenya. I don't think she's ever had assignments near where they live, and it turns out where they were was relatively prosperous, you know, so I still didn't know the half of it. She is a project coordinator, and she emphasizes making sure all the projects make full use of local people and resources, because the development community has learned over the decades that it actually doesn't work that great to just power in there with a bunch of, you know, overeducated white people and lots of tools and do a project and leave again, you know. It's much better if everybody helps for lots of reasons. So all this came back to me because a couple of days ago, Marcy was sending me photos on WhatsApp from her son's first birthday. So my grandson, really cute. You have no idea. You have not seen cute like this. He's a chunky little boy. He's just learned to stand. He's got these little pursed lips, bright eyes. So after all that good news, a bunch of pictures, her friend group takes a lot of pictures. You don't get out of a meeting with anybody with about 50 to 100 pictures. So she sent me a bunch of pictures. And then she shared that her agency had just been shut down, suddenly, due to the cuts to USAID. And I was like, what cuts? And you probably have read the news since then. So maybe you know the Trump administration suddenly, by executive order, told the federal government to stop funding anything, period, for some amount of time, supposedly to do a review. Stop everything. And to Marcy's credit, she wrote to me that she wasn't so worried just about like her job, although that's kind of amazing because she makes just enough. With a professional job, she makes just enough to barely get by. But she said she was worried about the well-being of the communities that they serve, and especially the children that they serve. The NGO she works for is Save the Children. They had a billboard downtown recently, actually. So I think of her when I go by it. So there I was, just minding my business. I think I was sitting in my comfy chair reading Dharma books, and my phone started dinging because, it's an 11-hour time difference, so she sends me stuff at odd hours. And suddenly I'm face to face with what's happening in Washington, D.C. But with a deeper appreciation that what happens there affects the whole world, not just our country. Although the nature of that funding freeze was that it was threatening all kinds of programs in the country too. Our local Meals on Wheels wasn't sure they could deliver that day, Amazing. And as you probably know, by the next day, right before it was supposed to officially go into effect, a judge blocked that order, as it is clearly unconstitutional. And for a moment I was thinking, oh good, all better. Whew. Crisis averted. I do tend towards optimism, I think it's mostly good for my mental health, but sometimes it's a little naive, Because of course it's not all good. And then I came out of my avoidance and started digging in and learning about USAID and learning a little more about how the federal government works, and discovered just how much damage was caused by even the threat of that happening, even if it was never officially begun. So it's just so hard to know, how do we respond to this? How do I respond to this situation, what's going on? And I think it's fine to take breaks, that's for sure. We're going to burn out otherwise. And it'd be foolish to think one of us can just make it all better if we just are smart enough or work hard enough. But there's got to be a way that we can respond. And I've never been a direct, off and on a little bit, but not so much a direct political activist. It's overwhelming. I worry I'll just make it worse. So I've been trying to intuit, how can I help? And this makes it sound like a tidier story than it is. Our minds are never a tidy story. But what I'm noticing that I'm putting together now is that I've been really trying to recommit myself, kind of out of necessity, I guess, to my own practice of compassion and wisdom and kindness. And my aha with all this stuff was, this is to the idea that peace does really start at home, and that's also true. It's not either or, right? It's both and. To help in some tangible way in the big world, but to take care of ourselves and each other at home actually really matters and really has an impact. A few times recently I've had some big spikes of interpersonal stress and confusion. I've been pretty upset about things a few times, and it would just get in my mind, you know what I mean? And the mind's chewing it over and chewing it over. You know what I'm talking about? Is this just me? Didn't think so. And then I started to notice, I walk with it, I sit with it, I breathe with it, I journal about it, and I'm not going to share my journal with anybody. And then somehow the practice is in there. I've never been one just to kind of consciously think, I should do the such and so practice. That would help. I just don't think of that, I sit every day, so I guess I'm practicing. But I've never been like, oh, if I did loving kindness practice with this kind of worded, that would really help right now. I'd release the tension and then I'd see the wisdom. It doesn't work that way for me. Maybe it does for some people. But then one of these things I felt really tight about, I noticed the other day, it shifted. It hugely shifted. Somehow I went from a kind of righteous state, I know I'm right, and pretty much the solution to this problem is the other people to get it, that they're wrong and I'm right, Various different theys, We're good at making theys, sadly but truly. It shifted to something bigger, something more kind and spacious, and something where I could actually see, oh, I've been making this worse. Yeah. From this default ways of looking, from this default to some negativity, from this defending of the self, right? We all know about the self, tender thing that it is, tender and fearful. To getting more curious, to get away from how can I prove my point to how can I help? What would actually be helpful? And I remember Norman's practice assignment to me when I ordained. He said, yeah, all you got to do is remember 3 things. And I'm like, oh good, I like the short lists, that I'm more likely to remember. I think I have like the Eightfold Path down, but 8's like a lot, 3 is good. 3 is good. And he said the 3 things are be humble, see everyone as Buddha, and try to help. And the wonderful thing seems to be, and maybe this is primed and supported by practice, I don't know, but it seems like I can't stay tight and miserable forever. It's just like not really possible. Eventually it lets go. Eventually something about the way Buddha nature is really, really helps, emerges. Wisdom emerges, compassion emerges, humility returns, and I see we're just a couple of Buddhas, maybe a little bit confused as Buddhas. A couple of Buddhas trying to work out how to turn the world and how to do the right thing. And we care so much about everything. This does seem to take a while. Lots of thought loops, lots of judging, lots of rehashing, lots of if only I'd setting, a good bit of complaining, which I try not to do out loud too much, but I can't speak to whether I succeed exactly on that. Occasionally, unfortunately, a grouchy email leaks out through the process, They're slippery little things, But then coming home, it feels so good. And when compassion and wisdom emerge, at least my experience is, it's not a chore to then, when it's appropriate, circle back and show this side of ourselves, to be humble, to be in service, to be more curious. It can sure be delicate to do and a little bit tricky to show up and ask for a reset and another try. I'm sorry, I was that way. It's a little tricky and delicate, but it's actually joyful, It's beautiful. It feels so much better when we release from some kind of internal aggression, whether it's towards ourselves or towards others, and wake up to the light, light like light and lightness of kindness. So there's so many ways we can help this world, actually. It's easy to be overwhelmed. It all does seem so big. And how could there be leaders, not just here, but all over the world, exercising power in those kind of ways, harmful ways. But there are. And I know some people are recommitting themselves to volunteer work that I know. Some people are active political activists. Power to them. They have a seat here anytime. Maybe it'll help. They do tend to burn out fast. And another thing I realized I was doing this morning after Marcy texted me was, it's also political activism to educate myself. I didn't know much about USAID. I mean, I knew the name. I knew it was an aid group. I actually saw a crate of boxes at the Nairobi airport that said USAID. I was like, oh, okay. That's us. So here's a little bit to educate myself and to share with you what I educated myself, a little bit about USAID, just in this example. And I'm realizing that, it's like they say, it's the platitude that knowledge is power. How can we really show up in the conversation if we don't actually know that much, I don't work for the UN, that's someone else's job, But this is a big deal. Much as there are many ways our country, I don't know if everybody here identifies as American, but those of us who do, plenty of ways that our country is not so great in the world, right? That's true. But there are some significant ways our country is amazing. It's generous, is effective, is organized to help others. So here's a few paragraphs from an article by Atul Gawande. You may recognize that name. He's the doctor who wrote the book Being Mortal. And he worked for the Biden administration, it turns out. He writes, he's educating us. Foreign aid has long been funded by bipartisan majorities in Congress as a cornerstone of not just compassion, but national security and diplomacy and defense. It's proactive. This aid supports work, much of it through contractors and non-governmental organizations like Save the Children, with countries worldwide in areas of mutual interest. Examples include combating global disease threats and malnutrition, stopping human trafficking and drug trafficking, advancing access to education for girls, and demining post-war countries like Vietnam and Cambodia, getting the mines out of the fields. But in the days that followed this order from the Trump administration, organizations across the U.S. and the world received letters stating they must stop all of this good work and all use of existing funds immediately. No staff can be paid, no services can be provided, no medicine or supplies, even if sitting on the shelves, can be used. And the impact has already been calamitous. I know the effect on health programs vividly, having myself run USAID's Bureau for Global Health during the last administration. For example, the U.S. has a limited ability to know what's happening with infectious disease outbreaks in some parts of the world, such as Russia and China. So USAID funded experts in neighboring countries, such as Kazakhstan, sitting there between Russia and China, to upgrade monitoring and share information about communicable diseases like bird flu, to be part of a global strategy for prevention and safety. That work halted. Many other programs similarly affected. USAID's work with WHO and the government of Tanzania, battling a Marburg disease virus outbreak, a cousin of Ebola. Have you ever read the stories about Ebola? Really frightening. Where there's no yet approved test, drug, or vaccine, and a death rate that can be as high as 90%. That program halted. And the one that hit closest to home for me is And America's celebrated global HIV program, known by its acronym PEPFAR, halted entirely. This includes its HIV vaccine research trials, its delivery of low-cost daily medications, the antiretrovirals, medications which are keeping 20 million people with HIV alive in more than 50 countries. And the rollout of a new U.S. drug, I hadn't heard of this, a new U.S. drug, which could end the AIDS epidemic. An HIV treatment and prevention drug called lenacapavir. Delivers 6 months of protection in a single shot. So presumably that would slow down the rate of infection enough that maybe AIDS would just vanish from the planet. And these effects go beyond just health. USAID comprises the largest non-military operational capacity the United States has for assisting countries in many mutual areas of cooperation. The agency has a network of hundreds of thousands of personnel across the U.S. and all around the world, and supported to do this work mainly through federal grants and contracts. And this infrastructure is the engine of American soft power and American compassion. In a matter of days, and contravening, against laws and budgets passed by Congress, the Trump administration has attempted not simply to redirect USAID's policy or adjust it, but to gut it. So he goes on, but that's depressing enough, huh? He mentions also that although it's a significant agency, $6.75 trillion budget, $8 billion budget, $8 billion budget, it's a drop in the bucket compared to the total budget, which is $6.75 trillion. Do you know the government spends that much in a year? $6.75 trillion. And USAID is impressively the second largest operational agency, but of course the military is 1,000 times bigger. So this stuff's upsetting, right? I'm more upset than before I learned that, about what just happened and the impacts it had, even if the courts thoroughly reverse it. Words are powerful, orders are powerful, power is powerful. It's another thing I'm trying to study more lately, power. Not just power up there somewhere far away, we all have power, right? We all use power. Are we aware of our power? Are we using it wisely for the good? Sometimes so, sometimes no. We're not aware, or we're misusing power. So here's a big ass example. But I think as much as we're able, as bodhisattvas, we kind of can't not know. And we know the bodhisattva vision is keeping at it no matter what. Bodhisattvas take impossible vows. We'll take an impossible vow in a couple minutes. Do you notice when we take impossible vows? Or are you just like, oh, that's a nice poem they chant here. Oh, cool. Saving all beings, stuff like that. So bodhisattvas need to be informed to do their work even if they don't know what to do. Sometimes the best things happen when we don't know what to do. Wendell Berry wrote a short poem about this called The Real Work. It goes like this. It might be that when you no longer know what to do, your real work has begun. And when you no longer know where to go, your real journey has started. The mind that is not baffled is not employed. The impeded spring is the one that sings. Isn't that great? But it's not comfortable, right? We like to know what to do. We like to know where to go. We don't like to be impeded. So here we really don't know what to do or where to go, and we feel impeded. But that's how life sings. So it's on each of us, right? How do we respond? Big ways, small ways, quiet ways. And maybe we're already responding and we don't know it. We don't want to turn such a question into a way to beat ourselves up and paralyze ourselves and think that we can never do enough, because that's not a bodhisattva's work either, and it doesn't help. Maybe our work is knowing the ways we're already responding with wisdom and kindness to this world of suffering and joy. I can't help but think putting energy into our Sangha is a good thing, right? Is part of that response. That's actually true. We're offering something important here. Somehow enough of us wind their way in the dark down the stairs and around to the back of the building and get in here, or on the Zoom link. A couple months will be more obvious in the community. That'll be interesting, huh? What are we going to do if there's like no room? Like we open that building and it fills up completely and we don't fit there? Great problem to have. What if the entire town of Bellingham's like, oh my God, yeah, we need meditation now. Can I squeeze in? This is desperate. Freaking out here. So taking care of things at home is also responding. It's good to remember that our American dollars do still go really far in many parts of the world, like really far. You know, I like the occasional latte too, but yeah, what are those, like $8 now or something? That's a day of food, many places in the world, you know. And part of why we ended up sponsoring Marcy back then, maybe it was 2012, or no, it was way before that, maybe 2005 or something like that, is my friend who was organizing that said, well, it is a commitment, Tim. It's $800 for the year. And then he explained, and that's everything she needs. Tuition, room and board, you know, necessaries, you know, toothbrush and all the things, books. And our kid at the time was in preschool 3 days a week, which cost $400 a month, you know. He was about to graduate from preschool, so we're like, that's ridiculous. We can't not help this girl in Africa have a whole new life for the cost of 2 months of preschool. What, you know, it's impossible not to do that. And you'll see in the newsletter which just came out, one of our members, Ken Oates, and his wife Julie mostly actually, she's sponsoring an Afghani family in a similar kind of way, very complex, and she put out a GoFundMe link, so if you want to help, there's information in the newsletter. But yeah, infinite number of ways we could send dollars to some place where they would really help. Do we need all of our dollars, really? So how is it for you? How are you responding? And it doesn't have to be linked to the politics in Washington, right? That's just one thing. It's an ominous thing, but it's just one thing. So this little verse here at the end of the talk just kind of seems like a little ritual, but maybe we'll hear it differently tonight, huh? Pretty big statement we're making. Maybe this is the answer to that whole thing. But how do we live it, you know? May our intentions equally extend to every being and place, with the true merit of Buddha's way. Beings are numberless, I vow to save them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable,